Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be attempting a 486 build. Previously I took a look at the Pentium 200, and that's kind of for my higher end DOS gaming, and I wanted a machine that was a little bit lower end. The 486 is obviously one of the classic early 90s DOS PC machines, and now I wanted to see with some parts I had as well as some new acquisitions, see if I could assemble a 486 machine. I've got both a 486 DX2 66 and a DX33. A number of different options assembled. I've assembled the troops here ready for battle, and we're going to take a look and see where we end up. But I've got a number of different options. I've got 3 different sound cards, a Sound Blaster 32 with the wavetable memory, but if I want to go non-wavetable and more just kind of classic FM sound, I've got another Sound Blaster card as well as an ESS audio drive. I've got a VLB Diamond Speedstar card here, and this is the motherboard I'm likely going to go with. It is a UM486V. We'll see if that works out for us, but I do have another board that I can explore if we need to. I've got a number of different speaker options, and then we've got this pretty cool case here. We'll see which of the drives actually end up in there. Probably wouldn't be able to do all 3 floppy drives, but could even just have them in there for aesthetics. And we've got the, I'll have to configure the LCD number display for the 66 and 33 with the turbo there. So we'll look at that. I've got actually the 430 meg hard drive that was in that Pentium machine, which would be a little more era appropriate to this machine, although I've also got a IDE to CF adapter that I might see if we can get that working, and we'll see how much memory we end up with in the machine. I've got these sims as well as a few others to test out. So let's jump right in and start the assembly, testing out components, and we'll see where we end up. To start out, I'm going to go ahead and remove this motherboard tray from the case, which will allow easier access to the motherboard and make it easier to test components as we're swapping things out. I've got a few standoffs already installed on the motherboard, and some screw standoffs on the tray. So we'll get that installed, and then let's start some testing. So we've got everything populated in the motherboard. I've got the CPU, the VLB video card, and we've got 4 sims in the bank 0 position. I actually had to look up some jumpers on theretroweb.com. They have a really great resource for vintage motherboards. You can actually search by number of types of sockets, expansion slots you have, and other information. And then there's very easy to find based on the actual photos of the motherboards which board you have. So I was able to find the jumpers and make some adjustments, and I think I've got it all set up. So let's go ahead and power it up and see where we're at. Alright, looks good. Got Diamond Speedstar Pro, 1 meg of video memory, and it looks like 16 megs of RAM, so these are 4 meg sticks, which is actually perfect for the 486. Probably even a little bit more than I need, but that'll be good. And we can jump in the BIOS. So I'll have to come back in here once I get the drive and everything in place. Initially everything looks all right. Okay, so I think the next step is to go ahead and get everything installed in the case, because that all looks to be working. I might actually do a quick test with ensuring the onboard IDE is working, and potentially I might do some speed test variations between the onboard IDE and using a VLB IDE controller. There's some jumpers that actually disable the onboard IDE so that you can use the VLB. but I might just do some quick Googling. I'm not actually certain on if that would be a generally speed boost or not. I would assume that the onboard IDE would be using as much speed as you would get through the VLB, but again, I'll have to read up on that a little bit. But I'll be back in a second with some further information there. All right, so we're back with the next stage of my build here. Had to go through some various jumper settings. I ran into a memory parity error on these initial sims that I was using, the 16 megabytes of RAM. So I've rolled over to 8 1 megabyte sims now. So we've got 8 megs in there. That's all testing fine now. I've been able to boot up using the drive as well as some floppy images on the Gotek. I've got my kind of precarious stack here, but I've got a anti-static bag under the hard drive. So I'm just doing initial testing here, making sure everything's working, and then we'll go ahead and mount it in the case. But we can see our Speedtest test here, testing just above a DX250, which is about what we would expect for the 66. And showing our system memory at 8 megs there, and some various memory tests, but making progress. Got the postcard in there right now because I was hitting memory issues, but again, everything looks good, so we'll move on to the next stage of putting everything into the case, and I'll see if I can get a CD-ROM hooked up and move on to installing Windows 95. So checking back in, I haven't put everything back in the machine yet, but a couple of updates. So one thing I realized is that this motherboard doesn't have a either built-in PS2 or USB, obviously, because it's older than USB, and I don't currently have a serial mouse. So it actually won't make a lot of sense to install Windows 95. So I am installing MS-DOS 6.22 currently. That's actually the main thing I wanted to use the machine for anyway, was older DOS games up to, maybe Doom level. So I'm doing that off of the Gotek just to kind of quickly show how that's working. So currently I'm on disk number 3, and it's actually in slot 4 on the Gotek. But now it's asking for, or actually it's asking for disk 3. We were on disk 2. So we will increment up to the next disk, and just like that, we're reading our next disk image and continuing the install. I'm installing to that original 410 meg drive that was in that Pentium machine that I found, which I think is a good match for this 486. And I'll again, we'll jump back in here once I've got that installed and get everything back in the machine and hopefully play some games. So I've taken the display out of the case so that I could reconfigure the jumpers on the back. I'm just using a bench power supply. It has 5 volt ground and a 5 volt pin here on the display. And then I've gone through and using the ground pin, I figured out where the ground pins were in this matrix. So it's got a 4 by 15 pin array of pins, and then by placing the jumpers, you can get the correct output. There's also, I haven't figured it out yet, but on the turbo button, on the machine, there's 3 wires on a connector. I believe it connects up to one of these. It wasn't actually hooked up when I got the case. These are labeled, looks like HCL, I believe T or I plus and minus, and P plus and minus. So these pins here, I'll have to figure out how those correspond for toggling the turbo. It's not clear to me how you would set these jumpers for 2 different numbers, because I would want it to be 66 and 33, obviously. But just a quick, I don't know if this will be good enough documentation for anyone else to run through the same configuration. But so going through, I've got my 15 columns here and 4 ABCD rows. It looked to me that basically every other column there was 2 ground pins. So in column 2, the 2 center pins were ground. Column 4, the 2 outer were ground, and alternating as you went. And then the digits of the actual each number starting from the top being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 for the center segment. I found that column 2, if you would ground the top and the bottom pins to those center grounds, that would give you that segment 1, and so on, every even column being those segments around. So just setting the top half and the bottom half to the same to get the same 6 and 6 digits. So that's what I've done. I've got the display all configured up, and maybe if someone has some feedback on how that turbo functionality would work, I can get that set up, but for now I'll just have at least the 66 displayed for my DX266. So we've got the machine all assembled and everything's working. We've got our display, a little bit dim it looks like in the camera here. I still need to get a case badge for this 486 and a few other details like floppy drive. Currently I've just got the GoTech hooked up. These two are just installed but not actually hooked up. A few of the difficulties I had in building the machine. I was going to originally use this Creative CT2940, but I couldn't get the machine to actually post with this card installed, so I'll need to do some troubleshooting later on to see if it is something specific to this card or just some combination of this machine. I did try a few different slots in the machine, so I'm not sure if there's potentially like a short on the card or something that is stopping the machine from posting. But I ended up going with the SB32 card. As previously mentioned, I did have the issue with the RAM parity, and I think that was about it outside of just having to configure some jumpers. But in this process has definitely reminded me of some of the downsides of these old machines, and a lot of the configuration and details there. I mean, one thing even was the sound volume. These Cambridge Soundwork speakers that I ended up hooking up don't actually have a volume control on the speakers themselves, and of course the sound card I'm using doesn't have the little volume knob on the back. So the only way to set your volume is via the mixer application. So you're having to launch into an application, change your volume. That could get annoying, especially when you're used to these days, you know, just in your Windows menu being able to quickly toggle the volume. Although back then most of the speakers did have a volume knob on the speakers themselves. So that about wraps up my 486 build here. We've got everything working, and we're able to play some games. I'll probably revisit this machine in the future, and we'll check out some other software and maybe some things that I played back in the day. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you next time.